So Esther, who's joining us, is an award-winning journalist, playwright, radio host, and the CEO of the Armah Institute of Emotional Justice. That's a powerful term, right? Euphoric living, powerful. Emotional justice, powerful. This institute is a forward-thinking organization recognized for creating resources and tools that support racial healing, wellness, and sustainable equity. In her groundbreaking book, Emotional Justice, Esther argues that the crucial missing piece to racial healing and sustainable equity is emotional justice, a new racial healing language to help us do our emotional work. The emotional work. So let's welcome Esther to the stage. Thank you.
It was 3 a.m. and I would hear this rumbling that sounded like thunder. But actually it was the sound of boots, and it felt like they were all around my head. I was sleeping, but it didn't feel like I was asleep. I felt unsafe. I felt like somebody was coming to get me. The boots would get louder, the rumbling would get louder and louder and louder. And then I would thrash awake, and I would be drenched in sweat. I would be terrified. These are night terrors that I would have for over 20 years. What I would learn is that whilst they never made any sense to me, I learned when my mother broke her silence that I was having a memory of a thing that I did not remember. And the memory was my mother was in the house the night of Ghana's first military coup, when soldiers broke into our home, 3 a.m. The rumbling was the sound of the tanks. The thrashing was the sounds of rifle butts breaking down cupboards and windows. They put a gun to my mother's head, and she was trying to figure out, how do I protect my babies and keep them safe whilst this mayhem and chaos is going on all around us. So often, especially as black women, we are taught, we are told that we are warriors. So what happens when that phrase is used again and again and again? So on the outside, you have your warrior-ness vibe, your fly. But on the inside, you feel like a mess. So that was my reality. And because on the inside I felt like a mess, I worked harder to make sure the outside looked extra fly. Who knows that story? You spend real time making sure the beat is good, the fit is right, the heels are high. Sometimes it's fly. It's literally just fly. Sometimes it's swagger. Sometimes you're feeling yourself. And sometimes it's a mask. Emotional justice was a term that I created through a set of experiences traveling the world as a journalist. Young journalist doing these amazing assignments in London, in Ghana, in South Africa, in Nigeria, in Kenya, in Washington, in Chicago. And couldn't understand that I had this internal disconnect. I'm young, I'm smart, I'm out there, I've worked, I've got my education, I'm doing this thing that I love, but I feel damaged. And I don't understand how, no matter how much I try to wrap myself in the fly, the damage keeps peeking through, and it shows up when I look at myself in the mirror. It shows up in how I see myself. It shows up in how I see myself. What do you see when you look in the mirror? Not the things that you put on to demonstrate who you want the world to see, but a person that you are underneath what you show the world. Emotional justice was about learning that you cannot PhD your way out of untreated trauma. And that I was a black woman, a young woman navigating this world with untreated trauma. Now we live in a world, in this space, Serenity House, Ghana, in this soil, in Accra, in this land, Ghana, where we're surrounded by a particular kind of culture, an ancestry, a tradition, and a language. But we are shaped by what I call the language of whiteness. What does that mean? It means that here in Ghana, or across the continent, or in the diaspora, we have all been taught about how the world came to be and our role in it as African people. We have been taught a history, a story, a narrative that says whiteness is the world, whiteness built the world, whiteness saves the world, whiteness rules the world. So what does that create? It creates a sense of your identity where the center of power is whiteness. Now, what does that mean in how you see yourself? What does that mean in how you engage with other people who look like you? What does that mean in how you're educated, what you learn, how what you learn shows up in how you see yourself, how what you learn shows up in how you expect to be treated and how you treat other people? The story of how we came to be as Ghanaians and Africans is about a narrative that is designed to teach you a certain inferiority about how you move through the world. And here's the thing. You may know it's a lie intellectually, right? Because you become educated, so you know that this thing that you have been taught is not the truth of your history. Shaz called out Ya Santua. So you are women, we are women born of warriors. That's the ancestry, that's part of our ancestry. But the narrative that shaped how you see yourself doesn't include that story. And while so many of us learned it later, how did what we initially learned show up and shape how we move through the world? Who we became to ourselves, how we see ourselves, and how we see the world. For me, there was a power in the mask, but I didn't understand the pain of it too. There was a power of being wrapped in something that enabled me to present as powerful. I didn't understand the toll of putting something on in order to step out into the world and to present myself. And so I wanted to tell a different story, and so I did. So the story that I told, being powerful, educated, smart, doing a particular kind of work, doing what I loved, it is not that that wasn't true, it's just that that was not the totality of my story. What is the part of your story that you don't tell, that you don't want to say, that you hide? Because if it were to be told, how would it shape how you see yourself? And how would it shape how others see you and how you think about yourself? So that's what I was reckoning with. This disconnect between how I presented and how I felt about who I was. And emotional justice was about saying, as a journalist, I am taught about the power of language. I'm a communications expert. I'm taught about the power of words, not just how you use them and when you use them, but what it means to listen. When you're doing an interview, you're taught, think about the kind of question that you're going to ask and the words that you use and why you use those words as opposed to those words. And then when somebody answers, you're taught, pay real attention to what it is they are saying, because that will guide you in terms of the next question, and that's how you measure whether or not the interview is any good. Emotional justice taught me that it's not about the question that you ask or the answer that somebody gives. It's about the pause between the question and somebody answering. Because the pause, the silence, that's where the truth lives. It's not about the power that I presented to the world and the internal pain that I was carrying. What's the place in between those spaces where so much of me exists and I'm trying to navigate? So, and here's the thing, I'm here working and I'm getting awards and I'm doing all this phenomenal work, but I'm struggling. I'm struggling. But struggle doesn't look like it's 5'10" in wedges and a nice chignon. We've been taught that struggle looks a particular way, and because we've been taught that, we act accordingly. Emotional justice was about saying, particularly as black women, as brown women in the world, we need a love language that is about giving ourselves grace first. Why? Because we have been nurtured and taught that the most powerful thing we can do as women is give of ourselves and all of ourselves to everybody outside of yourself. The idea of centering you, the idea of centering you is not what a great woman does. It's not what a badass woman does. It's not what a loving woman does. It's not what a great woman does. A great woman gives and 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 gives. And it doesn't matter that she has nothing left to give. No one's asking her about that. It doesn't matter that she's burnt out, exhausted, enraged, resentful. It doesn't matter that she feels all of those things, because as long as she keeps giving, the world will keep applauding her for being a badass woman. Or the warrior woman, the one who shows up on the front line, always willing to stand up and support anybody if there's an issue of injustice or some protection. And nobody questions if her front line is breaking her spirit or breaking her soul. We just expect her to show up. And worse than that, we can shame her if she doesn't. Same for the sister who's expected to give, the women who's expected to give. You ever had that experience where you just don't want to do it, or you just don't have it to give, or you don't want to do it, and yet you do it anyway? And yet you do it anyway. Emotional justice was about saying, we have a legacy of untreated trauma that is the result of how we have been taught about the way the world came to be and our role in it as black, brown, indigenous, and white people. And all of us, black, brown, white, indigenous, all of us have to unlearn that. Why? Because it taught all of us that one group of people does the work, does the labor, and another group of people are the beneficiaries of that work, the beneficiaries of that labor. And as long as the people who are doing the labor keep doing the labor, everything will be fine. What if the people who are doing the labor are understanding that this is unjust, it's unfair, and that's actually not how you have a humanity-centered healing? So emotional justice talks about what I call a racialized emotionality. So in other words, your emotions are not considered based on the fact that you're a human being who's going through a particular scenario, has a set of feelings, and needs a space that is safe where they can be expressed so that you can work through them and come out the other side. No. That if you're a human who feels anger about a situation in which you're being treated unfairly, that is not how it's measured if you're a woman who happens to be brown or black. No. What do you become? Say it with me. An angry black woman. We all know the phrase. And an angry black woman is a thing that you never want to be called, you never want to be considered as, and you never want to be identified as. Why? It has repercussions. Threatens your work, threatens that promotion, somehow makes you a person that other people, men, women, black, white, should be suspicious of. How many of us have walked that tightrope? I don't want to be considered angry, so I'm not going to show that I'm angry. I'm going to swallow that anger and I'm going to suppress it. I'm going to hold it because I don't want them to think that I'm angry, and I don't want them to look at me and think that I'm that angry black woman, and I don't want them to look at me and somehow see me differently. What about how you see yourself as a result of all that emotion that you're pushing down and doesn't get a chance to find its way in the air? We have been taught that we stay safe when we stay silent. But our silence is choking us, and it is an unpeaceful peace. And so, what is the silence that you need to break in your life, in your work, in your love, in your and for your future, that might serve to transform how you move through the world, to creating what we call in emotional justice a humanity-centered healing? A humanity-centered healing is when all our emotions are universal emotions. That the opportunity to work through a set of feelings about the world, its injustice, its violence, its refusal to honor you for the spirit and the beauty and the power and the talent that you have, that feeling a particular way about that is a human reality. It need not and it should not be racialized. Emotional justice connects those individual emotional realities to institutions and to systems. It treats the emotional as structural, saying that we have been taught this in the systems that we work in, whether it's education, entertainment, healthcare. Why do black women have a particular experience when they're in these worlds of healthcare, education, different than others? Why is it that your pain cannot be identified and considered as pain when it's emerging out of your body? Aren't you human too? How do you not feel pain? Why isn't your fragility seen as a fragility requiring empathy, as opposed to you're being treated as a person of suspicion who is then becomes a threat? Why aren't emotions safe in your body to be expressed and then received in the human way that you feel them by the rest of the world? So, emotional justice was saying, we need a new way. We need a roadmap that offers us language to think about this world of the emotional, race, gender, this language of whiteness that I talked about, this narrative that we've all been taught that shapes how we see ourselves and each other. We need a language to identify how it shows up in who we are emotionally and how we see ourselves, so that we can unlearn it and replace it with a love language that is about justice. Why is it about justice? Because justice is a corrective. It's about identifying the thing that is the problem, the thing that is wrong, and saying that this is a way forward to correct it. Why is it called a roadmap? A roadmap is about going on a journey. You can't go on a journey if you don't move. And with emotional justice, it's about motion, moving from where we are to explore and learn this new love language that's going to show up in how we move through the world, but most importantly, in how we see ourselves and how we see each other. What does it mean to do our emotional work? It means asking those kinds of questions. If I walked around this room and said to each one of you, when have you been silent when you really, really wanted to speak, but you were too scared about whether you would be heard, or you were too scared about what you would lose if you spoke? We are nurtured to believe in the power of us staying silent to keep the peace. What if we were nurtured to give ourselves grace so that we can find the voices that have been silenced, we can find the stories that have been silenced, in order to speak the truth that we haven't dared to speak? And we all have that. We all have that in different ways. What if we were able to listen to that truth within and among one another in a way that traditionally we don't feel that we've been allowed to? What if we stopped performing? What if we took off masks and simply said, my fly cannot be about a mask. I just want it to be about the fact that I like pink nail polish and gold rings. I don't want it to be a mask that is about protecting what I'm too scared to articulate. Because I don't feel protected, I actually still feel unsafe. And then I make other people unsafe because I'm being what? So controlling because I'm so terrified. So, I write about all of this in my book, Emotional Justice, A Roadmap for Racial Healing. And the idea is that we all have emotional work to do, but our work is not the same. The work of black people, brown people, white people is not the same. The work of black men, black women is not the same. We've got to identify it, articulate it, clarify and contextualize it so that we can get on and do it. So I close with this. What is the untold story that might transform your future and a person that you love? What would it mean to center the parts of yourself that you have silenced in order to transform where it is you want to go, but equally importantly, how you want to get there, with love, with peace, and with support? That's emotional justice. Thank you.
Wow. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. Very powerful. So I don't want to take any of the time from Q&A. Does anyone have a question or any comment you would want to share?
I'm not even sure where to start. I feel validated and transformed and just ready to get the book, to continue with the work. What you talked about, I really resonated with that because it wasn't that long ago that my silence literally started to paralyze me physically. And so that was the point where I said, no, I need to speak my piece, and, left my job, and I haven't really, regretted any of that. Like, I'm well for it. I'm here for it. I saw people who didn't do that and are not here. So thank you so much for sharing your story, and just thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And really,
yes, thank you.
We call it the emotional justice swagger salute. We say swagger salute for breaking a silence that gave you no peace, but probably made the world around you comfortable. And that's been too often the story, I think, particularly for black folk navigating a world shaped by colonialism and enslavement and apartheid, and how those systems continue to show up in how we see ourselves. And so I totally feel you when you say your silence can start to paralyze you. And that also, we live in a world that the only people that would invest in our healing is us. That it can't matter to somebody else more than it matters, to you. And, we're doing an event actually on the 23rd of September called Healing Harm, Healing History, that's specifically about black-on-black healing. And it's designed for us to think about who we are as global black people here in Ghana, across the continent, in the diaspora, how we see and feel each other, how we've been taught that that distance and anti-blackness is a healthy way for us to engage. Whose world does that serve? So thank you. With the work of emotional justice, we always connect the individual to the institutional. And when we say that, what we mean is our communities are institutions. You never just function, we are not islands, moving around in the sea, that we're part of communities. And we've all been taught how to move in that community in order to be safe. But sometimes what is defined as safety is not safety. Very often for women, it just protects a particular kind of relationship to power. So you talk about, sometimes women enforce things that are unhealthy and hurtful. And I think that's true because we've all been nurtured to navigate how that community is going to succeed. But what I would also say is very often those women have been educated and been taught about what being protected within that community looks like. And we all have our unlearning to do in order to break up with an understanding of power that can often actually be painful and can mean putting pain onto and into other people's lives. But the challenge is sometimes you're in a community that rewards that. And nobody aspires to be an outcast or to not be part of the place that they call home, or they want to be loved. So it's always a challenge, but it's definitely part of the unlearning and part of the work that is this emotional justice roadmap, for sure.
And even as you shared, Esther, the unlearning part, I think of the role of teaching then. We've unlearned, and so helping by teaching our children, or those in our community, as you're doing now, the language even,
Right.
to continue the work so that we can see things change in the community. So thank you for that. Okay, we have a question here. I think this might be the last question during the Q&A time, but again, we'll continue to talk outside of this time.
I would like to say that you've given me the one block I needed to gel a presentation I have next week, Wednesday, for postpartum depression. I started just this past Wednesday on Joy FM. Strong and Sassy is a Wednesday evening program. And this morning I was thinking about what exactly can I say? How can I conceptualize and contextualize how silence is going to choke you? And you've just given me the blueprint. So thank you very much. Because the whole structure of society is, once you get married, you become a mother, you have to enjoy the joys of motherhood. And if you have this disconnect where you don't feel the joy of having a child, the child has become a burden, you are going through that mental health issue of battling depression while taking care of a new life. How do you reconcile that when you know that even if you speak about it, those around you don't get it? So thank you very much for giving me that blueprint. I hope you join me next Wednesday to listen so that we get more women in Ghana to speak up about how they are struggling. We can't all just, even strong women cry. Strong women need support. So thank you, Esther.
Thank you so much. It's so powerful that you say that, I wasn't born in Ghana, but living here, I think one of the things that women are taught as part of this, the language of power, is how to keep each other in our place, as opposed to make room for one another to speak about what can be emotionally killing us. And that approach, not having room or space to speak your truth because society judges you, shames you, condemns you, and punishes you, creates what I call emotional homelessness. That's a phrase that I learned from my sister Nyamal Tadil. And emotional homelessness is where there is no safe space for me emotionally to speak my truth. And if there isn't safe space, you go wandering. And the wandering may not be physical. It may be the damage that we start to do to our bodies because we're looking for an outlet. I speak as somebody who's a survivor of a suicide attempt. So I know what it means for an isolation and a loneliness that leads you to endanger your own life because you feel there's no space for you to go. So I'm really happy, as somebody who was a former journalist and has been on Joy FM, I'm really happy that you're having that, conversation, and thank you for the courage to bring that conversation to the airwaves. It's crucial.
Let's give her one more round of applause just for this brave, incredible work.